All right. Thanks, everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us today. Let me get my screen share lined up here. All right, there we go. Just take a look here. All right, there we go. All right, good morning. Today we're going to be talking about understanding neurodiversity. Our presentation is going to be about an hour and a half this morning. We're going to have a 5-minute break in between. And here's sort of a rough agenda of what we're going to discuss today. So first, we're going to do some introductions, brief history of the neurodiversity movement, how it got started and where we are today, the impact and goals of the movement, some definitions, characteristics, and then using the strengths-based approach, which is going to be kind of our tool that we take away from today's training, hopefully, in working with young children and their families. And then we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll come back and we'll watch a couple of video case studies and talk about those as a having a conversation here amongst all of us. Definitely appreciate everyone's input when we're discussing these case studies. And then kind of winding it down, leaving you guys with some parent advocacy tips and then best practices for us as providers as well, and the outlook for the future in this area. All right, so a little bit about me, just in the chat real quick, who was here for my presentation 2 weeks ago on understanding developmental delays? Just give me a thumbs up or a wave if you were here last time. Okay, so sounds like most folks here are new and were not with us last time, so let me just briefly introduce myself. My name is Claire Ibrahim. I'm a speech pathologist by trade. I've been practicing in the East Bay for close to 15 years now. I'm the owner of Pediatric Language Therapy Associates. We are a child development center in San Leandro here in the East Bay, supporting families with children who have developmental delays. We offer speech therapy, occupational therapy, and ABA services. I'm also a part-time faculty member at Cal State East Bay in the speech pathology department. And so our center is a training area for graduate student interns and volunteers who are learning to become speech pathologists and occupational therapists. My history, my background before opening the practice, I worked for Oakland Unified, and then I worked at Kaiser until the pandemic hit, and I decided it was a better idea to launch my own program. So here we are. I have 4 teenage girls, and one of them is, the third one is graduating high school in a couple of weeks from Skyline. So, dealing with the Oakland teacher strike, if any of you guys are affected by that, it's kind of a monumental kind of time that I feel that we may be on the cusp of some really big changes happening in education, especially in our communities and our neighborhoods. So I'm excited about what the strike might potentially yield for all of us as a community. This picture here was, we've been working very hard with the city of San Leandro to get our center up and licensed and permitted, and just getting the sign up was a huge monumental event for us. So that's me with our sign vendor after we got our sign up. So if you're ever in the East 14th Street area going towards Bayfair Mall, look for our sign there. Give us a wave. And a little bit more here about our center. So we were established in 2020, started out as a small speech therapy private practice. During the pandemic, we've grown to become kind of the East Bay's premier child development center. We offer an array of services, and we are hoping to open our inclusion preschool program. It was supposed to be in spring, but now we're cruising into summer. So hopefully sometime this summer, give us a call, check us out on the website. If you have families who need services and resources, we're here to serve the community. All right, so that's about me. Let's hear all about you. So please type in the chat. Let us know your name and the name of your agency and kind of what brought you to today's training. What are you hoping to learn or take away from today's training, or anything you want to share about the neurodiversity movement, neurodiversity paradigm? What's your experience been, and what are you hoping to take away from today? So I'll give you guys about a minute to respond in the chat box, please. It's always fun to see familiar faces in these trainings. We're all a very connected community, helping support young children and families in this area. So it's always nice to feel part of that collective, community. All right, really wonderful cross-section of providers here, as always. Great to be part of this. Give it about 10 more seconds, have everyone participate and let us know kind of what you're hoping to take away from today's training. All right, so let's dive right in here. We're going to first introduce history of the neurodiversity movement. So neurodiversity is a term that is used to describe the range of neurological differences that exist among all of us, right? And it's the idea here that we all have brains, all our brains are different. Even though they generally work the same, they have the same brain function, there's diversity in our neurological makeup across the board. And so this is an umbrella term that kind of encompasses these conditions such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome. But it's founded in this idea that all of our brains are different, and that there's diversity amongst us all that should be honored and respected. So the term neurodiversity is a relatively new concept, but its impact on society and the workplace has been pretty significant. And it's important for us all to kind of be familiar with some of these terms and use these guidelines to help direct our practices. Okay. So I like this graphic here. Neurodiversity, it's a big word for a simple idea, and it just refers to neuro, meaning the brain or the nervous system, and diversity, that there's a range of different kinds of makeup in all of our bodies, right? So it's a range of different kinds of human brains and neurological makeup. A little bit more here about the history. So the concept sort of originated in the disability rights movement, and this came about in the 1970s. It's when I was born. And this is when disability activists kind of began to challenge the existing medical model of disability, which viewed disability as a medical problem that needed to be fixed. So, you know, if you had a disability, developmental delay, or a diagnosis, cerebral palsy, anything like that, you were seen as sort of a problem that needed to be fixed or needed to be pathologized. And you're shifting that view from that medical model to more of what's considered a social model of disability, which kind of links that person's experience to their interactions between their impairment and the environment, right? So getting folks with disabilities and diagnoses, folks who are neurodivergent, out into the community and expressing that folks have rights just like anyone else, right? Anyone with a disability or an impairment or any kind of condition that makes them be seen or operate differently in the community or in the environment should not be a reason to hold anyone back, to keep them locked away in any sort of facility or rehabilitation or anything like that. That we want to get folks out engaging in the community and really living up to their highest potential, and that individuals' rights should be honored and respected and supported as much as possible. That disability rights are civil rights, they're human rights. And this is something that we all need to keep in mind as we, as a sort of a driving underlying force that drives our practice. And this is a picture here of Judy Singer. She was an Australian disability rights activist who sort of really pushed this idea and argued that individuals with differences should be accepted and supported rather than stigmatized. You know, since the 1970s, this idea has picked up a lot of traction in all different fields. So not just human rights, but in, you know, psychology, education, employment. And, you know, I'm assuming that many of you have heard this term out and about in your workplace and with the folks that you are working with. So impact of neurodiversity on society. You know, it's a relatively new concept, but it's already had a pretty significant impact, has helped to challenge the stigma and discrimination that's, you know, often faced by individuals with differences. And it's really helped to move us as a society towards a more inclusive and accepting society. Again, shifting the focus away from this medical model to more of a social model. And in doing so, we're really trying to recognize the unique strengths and abilities of folks with neurological differences, and advocating to make sure that there's accommodations and support to help folks really thrive in their communities. So I want to hear from you guys. Why do you think this is important? Why do you think this concept is important? What are your thoughts on that? I'm going to bring back my bar here so I can see the chat. There it is. So please share your thoughts on why you think this shift in a paradigm, a shift in thinking, and a shift in our approach is important. Why do we need this? Great, we're getting some good feedback. People are not one size fits all at all. Everyone has strengths to contribute, absolutely. Increase understanding, stop stigmatizing. Equity, inclusion, yep. Compassion, absolutely. I like it. Meet people where they're at. This is wonderful. All right, feel free to keep on typing in the chat. I'll check back with it periodically. This is really great feedback from everyone. All right, here's another reason why it's important. The current CDC rates, prevalence rates as of last month indicate that 1 in 36 children has been identified with autism spectrum disorder. This rate has tripled in the past 20 years. And really, when I explained to folks last time when I was preparing the slides for my last presentation, the statistic was 1 in 44. And while I was putting together, and doing some research, somebody alerted me to the fact that it's actually changed and now it's 1 in 36 children. And there's a number of reasons for this, higher rates of diagnosis. We're a little bit more keyed into signs of autism spectrum, and the diagnostic tools have gotten a little bit better at identifying children at an earlier age. But the fact remains that there are a growing number of folks who are considered neurodivergent, neurodiverse, and different from us, and different from each other, right? But the idea is that there are just growing numbers of individuals around us who are going to be considered neurodiverse, neurodivergent, that we're going to engage with in everyday life, right? These children are going to grow up into teenagers, young adults, folks out in the work world, our coworkers, people that we're going to be engaging with in everyday life. And so this is really the most crucial idea here, is that we have to become more accepting as a society, supportive, compassionate, all those wonderful terms that you guys brought up, inclusive, and just aware, right, of folks around us. So right now we are providers who are supporting families of young children, but again, thinking about these young children are going to grow up and be our peers and with us, around us all the time. And so how do we as a society bend to support, to receive, to acknowledge, and to respect folks whose neurological system is different from us? Here's a great graphic I saw here. It's a quote from a dad, father of a 21-year-old. He said, yes, he's different, just as we're all different. Never underestimate people with neurodiversity. They can do more than you could ever imagine. So this is kind of one of the key sentiments here. The key ideas is never underestimate. All right, so there are 5 goals of the neurodiversity movement. There are a lot of goals, but just kind of encapsulated in these 5 areas. So the first one is raising awareness. We've talked about this a little bit, and this includes educating the public about strengths and abilities of neurodivergent individuals. So, as providers working with families, we have the privilege of being exposed to young children, to diverse families, and all types of diversity, right? Ethnic, cultural diversity, racial diversity, folks from all different backgrounds, folks, especially here in the East Bay and the Bay Area, who speak different languages. But I think also, in the Bay Area, we tend to kind of we live in a bubble because we are such a diverse society, and other people living in other areas, maybe more rural areas, are not exposed to diversity in such a large way that we are. Keeping in mind that this is a benefit for us, having exposure to diversity in our area, but not everyone is. And so we want to make sure that we raise awareness among everyone, among all individuals, educating the public about strengths and abilities of neurodivergent individuals, as well as challenges and obstacles that they may face in society and in the workplace in growing numbers. Again, as more and more folks are being diagnosed and identified, there will be more and more folks growing up and entering in the workplace. And how do we support those individuals? So raising awareness is the number one goal. Number two goal, as many of you mentioned, was promoting inclusion, right? The neurodiversity movement wants to create more inclusive and accepting society for individuals with neurodevelopmental conditions. So advocating for policy change, practices in schools and the workplace that support neurodivergent individuals in all areas of their life. And then here are the remaining three goals here, changing attitudes. And so, folks need to be educated before we can hope to change attitudes. So we need to educate and then aim to change the way that society views neurodivergent individuals, to promote a more accepting and understanding attitude towards neurodiversity and compassion. I love that word. I'm going to keep going back to it because it's so important. Challenging stereotypes and misconceptions about neurodivergent individuals and promoting a more inclusive and empowering view of neurodiversity. Okay, goal number four is advocating for neurodivergent rights. And a lot of these goals sort of overlap. Some of these are kind of fit in more than one goal, but it's all the same flavor of awareness, education, and advocacy. So advocating for neurodivergent rights, thinking about health insurance coverage and really all components of our society, how they include and support rights for neurodivergent individuals, rights to access, rights to services, mental health supports, physical health supports, just kind of across the board, and making sure that rights are protected and upheld over time is a really important goal. And then lastly, but of course not least, is providing support and resources for families. If you are a parent of a neurodivergent child or you're working with neurodivergent children, you know that this is not always easy, right? Because it's society creates boxes that we're all expected to sort of fit in. And if you're a parent and your child is not, you're noticing that your child is not necessarily fitting in the box that society has created, that can be hard and it can be challenging, and there can be a lot of demands put on you as a parent. Parenting is hard enough, but there's an additional layer of demands maybe placed on parents of neurodivergent children that we need to support and recognize and provide resources as much as possible, and really let parents know that we're in it as a community, as a village, to support young children as they're coming up and growing up, and that we're doing this in an accepting, again, in a compassionate way, to really convey the idea that parents are not alone in this, and that we're all here. We've got you, right? We support you, and we're doing it together as a community, as a village. I'm going to pause real quick. Any questions or comments in the chat that anyone wants to share, please feel free to, jump on in. You can also unmute yourself and share your, love to hear folks' voices too. So please feel free to share here before we dive into a little bit more of this dry definitions, and then we'll get to more of the good stuff. What does this bring up for you? I just looking at some of the comments from before. Celebrating children's differences. Absolutely. Developing our practice so that every child can participate to their fullest. Thank you, Ashley. Love that. Having neurodiversity lenses. That's right. Let's all put on our neurodiversity glasses. and see the world through those lenses. I love that. Wonderful. Yeah, differences are scary to some and can be considered bad. And this is, thinking about human rights and civil rights, this is not a new concept, right? This has been around in our country since our country was founded, in terms of, racial equity and rights for everyone. This is just sort of an extension of that idea that everyone is equal, everyone should be treated equally. That's right. Cultural perspective is important. How communities perceive disability. We talked about this a little bit last time. We'll touch on it again today. All right, continuing on. Thanks for sharing your ideas. So some definitions here just to make sure that we're using the same terminology and that everyone understands the terminology. So again, neurodiversity, we've already talked about it, and it refers to the range of differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits that are associated with that. And this is regarded as part of the normal variation in the human population. Neurodivergence refers to differences in mental or neurological function from what is considered typical or normal, right? So this raises a big red flag here, and then there's a comment here at the bottom that there's really no stable or universally understood concept of normal, like what is normal, right? Everyone, not everyone necessarily agrees on what is normal, but the next couple of slides we'll talk about sort of typical or neurotypical characteristics that we sort of expect in our culture. So neurotypical refers to individuals whose brains develop in ways that are sort of considered usual or expected by society. And this kind of refers to folks who maybe don't have a developmental disorder like autism or a diagnosis or any sort of neurodivergent condition, are considered sort of neurotypical. Thinking about person first language versus identity first language. So person first language, an individual is referring to themselves as I'm a person with autism. So identifying themselves as I'm a human, right? See me and hear me and accept me as a human first. And I also happen to have autism. And this is in contrast to what's called identity first language, where individuals might introduce themselves as, hi, my name is Claire, I'm autistic, for example. And so they're identifying themselves with their neurodivergent identity. And so neurodiversity kind of embraces this identity first language. And I'd love to hear from folks who have already identified or introduced themselves as neurodivergent who are here with us. If you have anything to contribute here with how you feel about it, but it's kind of a personal choice, right? Who are we to tell anyone how they should identify themselves, right? Everyone has the right to identify themselves how they want. And of course, this can change through someone's life as they grow, as they develop, as their experiences change. And so, maybe self-awareness, self-acceptance. Right now we're thinking about young, small children that we work with, but again, these young children are going to grow up to be middle schoolers and teenagers, and how do individuals introduce themselves or identify themselves or, name themselves to themselves, but then also out in the community. So this idea here is I am an autistic person correlates to something like I'm left-handed or I'm tall. It just sort of explains your characteristics as a human and how you convey that to other people. So if anyone wants to chime in the chat, I'll keep going, but please feel free to share how you feel about that. Okay, more definitions here. This is a term, maybe some of you have heard this term is ableism, right? And this is, ableism is a type of discrimination and social prejudice against people with physical or mental disabilities or people who perceive themselves as being disabled. So ableism characterizes people as they're defined by their disabilities, and also sometimes classifies disabled people as people who are inferior to non-disabled people. So it's discrimination. Ableism is a type of discrimination. It's in alignment with ageism, when we discriminate against older folks or senior citizens. It's in alignment with racism, where we discriminate against people because of the color of their skin. Any kind of ism that refers to discrimination from one group of people to another group. And so here are some examples of ableism: believing people with disabilities have less value and worth, assuming that they want to be healed or that they can sort of overcome a disability, suggesting that neurodivergent folks are inspirational for handling everyday activities and routine tasks, assuming that maybe they lead an unhappy or limited life, or assuming that they can't do things for themselves. Again, these are just examples. There's a million other examples of ableism. And, you know, a lot of this is just, the first step is really creating awareness about our own implicit biases. If we are considered or consider ourselves to be neurotypical, do we have some ableist implicit biases or biases that we have that we're sort of not aware of, that we need to become aware of before we can make change into our approach or our practice? And so the goal here is to become anti-ableist. Some of you have heard becoming anti-racist, right? It's the same idea here, the same flavor. Anti-ableism, strategies, theories, and actions and practices that challenge and counter ableism, inequality, prejudice, and discrimination based on any developmental, emotional, physical, or psychiatric disability there. Any questions about that? Have you heard the term ableism? This makes sense. What do you think about it? Lita, did you want to say something? Go ahead and unmute yourself. Please feel free to share.
Thank you. Yeah, I did want to say something. I have never seen this in a basically defined before. I've experienced it from in my culture from South Asia. This is a completely normal thing where they're it can be healed. Literally, you can have anything, any disability. Everybody always tries to quote unquote make you feel better. It can be healed. And it kind of crushes you more because you're like, why am I not healing then?
Right. Or even do I want to be healed? What is healed, right? What does that mean? What is healed? Maybe, how about I'm just fine, right? I'm good the way I am, and I like it, and I have a great life, and I feel part of a community. And yes, there are things that might be challenging, and yes, there are things, but isn't that true for everyone, right? All of us here try our best and have trouble with some things, you know. I'm not good at exercising or, you know, I'm not good at math necessarily. Everyone has their strengths and things that are challenging for them. And it's really accepting those challenges as not being things that need to be fixed or quote unquote healed, like you said. That's great. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else want to share? I love this stuff. We just, you know, I always lose track of time because we get into chatting, and it's just really, really great stuff, really valuable. All right, again, keep the conversation going in the chat. Please feel free to share your ideas and questions and feedback. You know, I'll check in periodically, and we'll keep going here in the meantime. All right, so anti-ableism. And towards the end, we'll go over some resources to help us in this area. Okay, so going back to this idea of what is normal, right? What is neurotypical? As a society, as Western society, there are some perceived traits of a neurotypical personality. And this is an idea of what sort of normal people can do or are good at. So having strong social and communication skills, for example, being able to navigate socially complex situations with relative ease, share how you're feeling, convey how you're feeling to other people, listen and take in how other people are feeling and react sort of accordingly or appropriately, what is considered socially appropriate. Being able to make friends and establish romantic relationships with ease. The ability to participate in loud, crowded, or visually overwhelming settings like a concert or a Warriors game with relative ease, or having a lot of people around you in a crowded space and not feeling overwhelmed by that. So these are traits or quote unquote abilities. I'm using a lot of these air quotes because these are just terms that we have to question of what's considered neurotypical. I'm sure a lot of us, just by reading this, would think or claim that, yeah, I have trouble with some of these things as well. And so normal becomes a questionable concept, right? Again, what is normal? Here's some more perceived traits. So thinking, at the last training, we talked about developmental norms, what's normal, what's expected, what's typical. So folks who are considered neurotypical develop in all these areas at a specific pace, order, and level. So verbal, physical, social, and intellectual skills are kind of developing linearly. We talked about functioning well in complex social settings with large numbers of people, having little or no difficulty dealing with sensory information like bright lights or sounds, crowds and movement, finding it easy to engage in team activities, team sports, games, group projects. Those of you who work with older kids, elementary school and older kids, we do a lot of group project work. Learning in a fast-paced, highly verbal and competitive setting with large numbers of same-age peers. And this is really a skill that is expected to be picked up relatively quickly, even in kindergarten, as these expectations are trickling down, and kids who are younger and younger are expected to gain these skills and be pretty proficient in order to be considered competitive in the workforce, in the work world, or in college. Being able to pick up those skills and be be competitive with them. Performing well under pressure, dealing with change, change in routines, change in the classroom, change in, we're having indoor recess today instead of outdoor, things like that. And just kind of overall speaking, moving, and behaving in quote unquote expected ways, such as speaking in a certain volume or distance from others. And again, thinking about differences in culture, this changes from culture to culture. Again, things like eye contact. In some cultures is seen as perhaps disrespectful to look someone directly in the eye when you're talking to them. And body proximity, ideas such as these are different amongst all people. So again, going back to this idea of what is normal, but these are just kind of perceived traits of what we in Western society consider to be neurotypical, and kind of what is expected in society of starting again from early childhood. Maybe some of you guys are seeing this in your early childhood education settings. Please share in the chat. I'd love to hear from you how you see this trickling down in terms of what are our expectations for our little ones in early childhood settings. And so again, thinking that, keeping in mind that many of us here who are considered or consider ourselves to be neurotypical do have challenges in many of these areas. And so this is where this neurodiversity comes in, is that we're all different. We all have strengths. We all have areas of challenge. And so folks who are neurodivergent have different strengths. Some examples here: being able to focus intensely on a specific topic for a long period of time. Thinking creatively, focusing on details, having above average skills in math, music, or art, kids who are considered gifted, having strong long-term memory abilities, being very honest, which can be seen as harsh or sometimes aggressive, but can also be seen as a benefit or a strength. Having high energy, being highly observant to details, being very good at problem solving. So lots of strengths here that we have to look for and train ourselves looking through these neurodiversity lenses, like someone mentioned, to look for the strengths, to look for the characteristics that using the strength-based approach, which we're going to talk about, to identify what are individuals really good at, what are the gifts that they bring to our society and to our communities. Just go back here and take a peek at the chat. Love to hear everyone's ideas. Yeah, pressure to hit the milestones on time. What else are you seeing? And pressure is a great word. Ashley, thanks for sharing. In terms of pressure in early childhood of these neurotypical characteristics that we value in Western society. Holistic perspective, I love it. All right, so I'm going to introduce this idea of utilizing a strengths-based approach. And this is something that I really want to drive home, and I want everyone to leave today's training understanding this strengths-based approach. And this is shifting our perspective from a problem-focused approach. Again, thinking back to the medical model as disability or differences as problems that need to be fixed, that need to be healed. And we're going to move away from that idea and change our perspective to a strengths-based approach. And it's not always easy, right? Because as professionals, as providers, we want to fix things, right? We want to help. We want to make life better for individuals and their families, or make life easier. These are what we have been trained to do. These are ideas that we maybe went into our respective fields to try to make differences in people's lives, right? But it's not always necessarily welcome. It's not always warranted. And it's not always, there's not always a problem. And when we approach individuals or situations from a strengths-based approach, what we want to focus on is how do we, instead of this top-down fixing approach or perspective, we want to think of how we can lift folks up, right? So it's this lifting folks up from underneath, but only if they want it, right? If individuals and their families want it, if they ask for it. We're not coming in to fix the world and create problems where there's not necessarily a problem. So what we want to do is change our focus, change our perspective to really be detectives and try to identify when we meet a new individual, we meet a new student, a new family, a new coworker, a new peer, a new client that we're working with. The first thing we want to do is try to identify what are that individual's strengths rather than what's wrong, okay? So strengths-based practice has its roots in what's called self-determination theory, and there are three components to this. This may be a lot of new jargon, and we'll work through it together. So there's three parts to it. Autonomy, and you guys have all heard the term autonomy before, and it really just refers to being free to make choices in your life and not being controlled, right? Free to choose what you want to do. When we have a child that comes to us, the parent brings them for speech therapy, right? Let's say a 5-year-old on the autism spectrum who comes to us for speech therapy. We're not only assessing that child to see where, maybe their deficits are in communication as it compares to what's neurotypical, because this is usually what the parent is looking for or what the preschool teacher has identified as the area of deficit, right? We're also looking to see how that child is letting us know that they want to or that they don't want to participate in speech therapy. So maybe this child is not using words to communicate, but they're very, very clearly letting us know that they don't want to participate in speech therapy. How are they doing that? Maybe they're climbing under the table. Maybe they're physically turning their back towards us to let us know that they don't want to look at what it is that we're presenting to them. Maybe we put a puzzle on the table and they're swiping it off the table to let us know it's pretty clear. This child does not want to participate in speech therapy, and they should be able to freely choose that, right? Me as a speech therapy provider or anyone on my team is absolutely never going to force that child to participate in something that they don't want to do. And so that's autonomy, being able to freely choose things in your life, not being controlled. And the burden is not forced compliance. The burden is on us as adults and providers, educators, and professionals who are working to support these families to honor and to respect that autonomy, and to tell that child, hey, I hear you. It's looking like you don't want to do that today. Maybe it's just today. Maybe next week you'll come back and you'll want to do it. Or maybe this is just a no-go for you and we're going to think about doing something else. Maybe we're going to change our approach. Maybe we're going to go outside and throw a ball back and forth and maybe work on developing language and communication that way. So again, it's understanding that preference that is being conveyed by the individual that we're working with, and not being so hard driven on fixing the problem or fixing the child, but rather hearing and receiving and respecting that autonomy, and adjusting ourselves, calibrating ourselves accordingly. The second part here is competence, and this is understanding, and we're going to always presume competence. I'll talk about this in a second. And then the last part here is relatedness, the importance of relationships with others. And what I tell my team at our center is that we can't expect to make progress or make gains in teaching skills to a child until we've built a relationship with that child. And so our first few sessions might just be playing, might just be engaging, building trust, and building that relatedness, because if you don't have that relationship, you absolutely cannot expect to make a change in building skills and making progress until you have that relationship. So that's that relatedness. So those are the three: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And our practice really starts to look different if these core psychological needs are being held as primary drivers to our approach. So self-determination. This is the idea that individuals are acting as their primary causal agent in their own life and making choices and decisions regarding your own quality of life that are free from outside influences or interference. And for neurodivergent individuals especially, but for everyone, there is a direct link between self-determination and your quality of life. The more you have control and are able to make decisions that affect your own life, the better your quality of life is going to be, right? That's common sense and makes a lot of sense for us. So here's kind of a graphic. And this is the idea of self-determination theory. So this is a theory that extends outside of neurodiversity. This applies to everyone. So thinking of your own motivation and engagement, what gets you up in the morning, what motivates you to sort of participate and engage in different areas of your life are these three components. So competence, feeling that you're good at what you do and feeling that people believe in you and understand and support your competence. Autonomy, having a choice, being able to be yourself. And relatedness, feeling part of a community, feeling a sense of belonging. Maybe you feel connected to your coworkers, your team. Maybe you feel connected to your peers at school. All of those three prongs really drive our motivation and engagement as humans. And again, this is for everyone. And when we have that motivation and engagement that is fueled by these three sort of, it's like the motivation and engagement is a car, and you have three gas pump holes, like you would, usually have one, but if you have three, that you're fueled by these three gas pumps: competence, autonomy, and relatedness, they fuel your vehicle. And that's what drives you to motivate, to engage in everyday life, and really enhance your performance and well-being at the end of the day in your life. And so we want to use this or apply this theory of self-determination to everyone that we work with. So making sure that each of these three gas tanks are being filled or being fueled. Questions or comments on that? Please chime in the chat. Couple more slides here before we take our break. So this idea of presumed competence. So if we go back here, competence is the first gas tank here. We want to presume competence. Presuming competence means that a person with a disability or a neurodivergent individual has the ability to think, learn, and understand, even if you may not see any evidence that this is the case, okay? Often there's this assumption we have that autistic people, especially people who are non-speaking, can't understand what's being said, and that's absolutely not true. Sometimes it's true, but not always, and most of the time not. And so you as a provider or as an individual, a new person working with a child or a person with autism, you have to always presume competence, presume that they understand. And when we're teaching children, it's super important that children presume that children can learn once we find a way to reach them, rather than assuming that they can't learn because they don't learn the way other kids do, right? So the burden, it's not on the children to show us that they can understand. The burden is on us to assume that they can, okay? And sometimes it doesn't look neurotypical. It doesn't look the way we're used to it looking. But again, the responsibility is on us to be detectives, to find out, try different things, experiment, and see sort of what sticks, what motivates that child. Again, going back to this, when we presume competence, what do we see? When do we see motivation and engagement? And that lets us know that we're doing it right. When we don't see motivation and engagement, that lets us know that we've got it all wrong. We need to go back and look at our practice, review what we're doing, and change it up, switch it up, so that we really do get this motivation and engagement, because this is what's fueling that gas tank to motivate our kids, engage our kids in life. Autonomy. An important concept here is body autonomy, assent and assent withdrawal. So again, I was using that example of the child who lets us know that they don't want to participate in the speech therapy session. Or they don't want to participate in circle time, or whatever it is that they don't want to participate, they're letting us know. And then there's also this idea of body autonomy. We don't want to touch a child without their consent or their assent. And so the idea is to ask first, is it okay if I give you a high five? Not everybody wants to be touched. I think, again, as caregivers, we tend to be touchy-feely. We want to hug kids. We want to give high fives. We want to rub kids' backs, and not everyone's here for that. Not everyone responds well to that. Touching can be seen as a different response. And again, this can be cultural as well, not just in terms of neurodiversity. So we always want to ask first. Can I help you put your jacket on? Can I help you put your shoes on? So asking first is very, very important. Of course, keeping in mind that autonomy and independence are developmentally appropriate. And so as parents and caregivers and providers, of course, we're responsible for ensuring that children are safe and setting healthy boundaries, right? So we don't want to give full autonomy. We're creating sort of a boundary around it that creates safety and sets healthy boundaries. But within that framework, we want to make sure that we're asking for assent, and also recognizing and respecting when assent has been withdrawn. So maybe you're working with a child who was good at first giving you high fives, or really wanted to get hugs from you at the beginning of the day, or to get that physical input from a big squeeze or something like that. Some of you who are working with kids on the spectrum or who have other neurodiverse conditions that want physical input, a child may want that at first, but then they may not want it. And so they're free to let you know that they don't want that anymore. And so just because you asked the first time and they assented, doesn't mean that assent is like they've given you a blanket carte blanche allowance for you to touch them or high five them or squeeze them from now on, right? Assent can change and assent can be withdrawn. And so you want to continually be checking in with the kiddos that you work with and making sure that they're still okay with you doing what you were doing previously, that it still works for them. And then the third prong here, the third gas pump, is relatedness. And this is super crucially important to children's mental health. It's feeling like you're part of a community, feeling like you're related to other individuals. And that can be in the form of your family, peer support, projects, being part of a team, being part of a group, inclusivity in play, at school, at the park, being part of a culture, and that we want to make sure that we include our neurodivergent, neurodiverse kiddos with all kids. All kids need to be around other kids. Often we hear, I hear from families who have a newly diagnosed child that they're afraid to put their child in preschool. They're afraid to enroll their child in kindergarten. We want to encourage it and help parents work through that fear. And maybe there's misunderstanding, to help parents understand that children need this relatedness. And if they're not getting it at school, parents need to find other ways of creating that relatedness, whether it's playing with kids in the neighborhood, maybe making sure that cousins and extended family come over every Sunday and spend time with this child so that they feel like they're part of a community, that they feel related to people. And that is an important priority for supporting our kids. So let me just go back to this graphic here to make sure that we remember all three components of what helps children feel motivated and engaged. It's competence and presuming competence, assuming and presuming first and foremost that every child has the ability to learn and understand, even if they're not showing us in ways that you're used to seeing. And if they're not showing us, we have to change our approach to make sure that we are finding what works and what motivates them. The second one, again, is autonomy, making sure that children have the choice to be able to make choices, again, given that boundary, that safety net that's developmentally appropriate so children don't get harmed or get hurt, that children are safe. But we want to ask them first. Ask them, can I touch you? Ask them, can I give you a hug? Can I give you a high five? Even things that we feel maybe as neurotypical people, it's not a big deal, right? It's not giving a high five is not a big deal. I might put my hand up and say high five, and the child looks away from me. And I say, okay, no high five. And that's just fine. My feelings are not going to be hurt. I'm approaching this from the lens that not everybody wants a high five. And even if a high five is not a big deal to me, it might be to that person. We have to honor and respect that. And then the last gas tank here that motivates and engages our vehicle as humans is relatedness, that feeling of connection to others and that sense of belonging to a community. All right. Break time, we made it. Let's meet back here in 5 minutes. So my clock says, let's come back at 11:05. All right, the second part of our training today, we've got a couple of video case studies in inclusion, and these are inclusive preschool settings and how children start to notice changes in children who are neurodivergent when they are included with neurotypical peers. So let's dive in here and we'll have some opportunity for discussion and thinking about how we use these new lenses to look at situations where children are included. Okay, so let me give it a try here. Hopefully the sound works.
A commitment is a promise from me to you. A commitment is a promise that we keep.
Inclusion is an opportunity for students to interact with others that might not be like them. The students with autism see the typically developing students and pick up on some of their social cues, some of their behaviors, and in return, the students are able to become empathetic and understanding of some of the differences in the students that are diagnosed with autism.
The way they process information is way different than what we would process information, even though it's not the common way, it's their way.
Some of the challenges that students on the spectrum have in the classroom are directly correlated with the characteristics we talk about when students are diagnosed with autism, meaning that they might have some issues with communication and social skills.
Giovanni is diagnosed with autism. He is on the spectrum, and I clearly remember his first day in the classroom. He was very disengaged. He did not interact with any of the students. He barely interacted with me.
Good job. Gonna press down, press down.
That was actually last year, and coming in again this year, he kind of runs the classroom. He's become a lot more comfortable with situations that would have made him frustrated before. The fact that this classroom focuses not only on the academic parts of it, but also the self-regulation parts of it and the emotional part of it, then when they go into kindergarten, they're able to understand things a little bit better.
Being able to identify someone with autism as my friend, and that's what this program is about.
All right, so let's get ready to type in the chat here. What did you notice in this inclusion classroom in these areas that we talked about previously? So presumed competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Remember, those are the three types of gas that fuel our gas tank, that fuel the motivation. So the teacher talked about Giovanni last year. He didn't want to engage. He didn't want to engage with the teacher, didn't want to engage with the group. What do you think they might have done, or that they talked about, or you saw in each of these areas? Presuming competence for Giovanni, supporting his autonomy, and then supporting his relatedness to peers. Go ahead and type in the chat what you noticed or what you sort of got from that video clip. And those of us working in early childhood, I'm sure everyone has encountered a child like Giovanni. Yeah, the teacher just allowed them to be, right? I don't think anyone forced him or pressured him to participate in the group activities. They didn't treat him differently. They treated him the same as all the other children. It seemed like they let him come over and join the group when he was ready, when he was motivated. They assumed that he was learning just like everyone else. Inclusion at his own pace. That's beautiful. Yep. Offering the opportunity to do activities and assuming competence. Yep. Thanks, Dr. Joy. He was included just like everyone else. Beautiful. And then relatedness, being around peers, building relationships and friendships. Yeah, building the confidence. That's right, Ashley. You know, just when as teachers and early childhood educators, you know, when we believe in a child, when we presume competence, that feeling, that approach helps build a child's self-confidence. And this is for any child, not just a child with autism, right? When we presume that a child can do something just as well as any other child, that gives them that self-confidence, that boosts their self-esteem from the bottom up, right? Rather than us telling them what they have to do, rather supporting them and saying, I know you can do this. It's a different approach, right? It's a different level, a different type of support that ends up instilling self-motivation in children to allow them to be more engaged and motivated on their own. And it's sort of a more intrinsic motivation rather than one that's placed on the child from the outside, but rather something that's cultivated from the inside out. And that's what we're trying to get here. Awesome. Small classroom size. Yep. Yep. So Lita asked a question here. Lita, do you want to turn on your microphone and share?
Yeah, I'm curious about this. So not just with work, but on a personal level, I would say, like, my son has autism, right? And the teacher didn't presume competence whatsoever, but now I'm conflicted because he does struggle more than the other kids in many ways. So as providers, if we're working with children and we do see certain children struggle more, should we still continue to just assume they can continue?
Right. That's a great point. And so I think presuming competence is different than assuming, in the sense that presuming means that we're starting off from a place of you can do this. And remembering that these three factors drive motivation and engagement. And so if we're presuming competence, but we're not seeing motivation and engagement, that's an indication that there's a disconnect. And so as providers, we need to go back and revisit this, not change the idea of presumed competence, but maybe change our direction, and maybe seeing that what we're presuming is maybe not 100% accurate because not driving motivation. And so again, going back and being a detective and understanding, maybe the child is not learning in this particular modality of learning. Maybe they're not learning verbally. Maybe they need visual supports. Maybe they need tactile cues. What is the method of learning that's going to help drive that motivation and engagement? And if it's not the method that we're using, we need to change the method. But that never changes the fact that we presume that children are able to learn. Does that make sense?
It does. You explained it really well. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, we're running out of time. Let me get to our next video here. Okay, here's our second case study. This is Joseph. And this is an inclusive preschool up in Marin County.
Great Expectations is a new play-based preschool. We opened in August of 2018. We serve kids from 3 to 5 years old. What did you make? Great Expectations is a collaborative between Lifehouse, the Marin County Office of Education, and Dominican University. It came about when Nancy Dow Moody, the CEO of Lifehouse, noticed that inclusive schools were popping up around the Bay Area, but there were none in Marin.
My main idea for her was to understand that we're all the same, regardless of our challenges, because we all have them.
Good morning, everyone. It is time to start circle time. And make big circles with your arms.
They learn from each other on how to socialize, take turns, ask, negotiate with toys.
Is this happy birthday?
Yeah.
Is this Nathan's birthday?
Yeah.
Change in his behavior has been significant. Since coming here, he's grown so much. Like, our biggest goal was for him just to love school, and he loves coming to school every day.
Our outside area is really spacious. It includes a variety of equipment and things to do. We have equipment that they can run and climb and swing. We have a nice garden where they can grow plants and help water. And we even have a special area for digging.
I put a bottle.
I think it's helpful for him to actually be immersed in an environment where he's seeing that so many different kids are working on so many different things.
Joseph is learning patience. He's learning that people come in different shapes and sizes, and some kids can do certain things and some cannot, and we just have to be patient and guide them through it. And he is learning that he has to wait his turn longer.
So nice. That was so nice. Pull yourself up. Each week, our class participates in occupational therapy, or what the kids call motor group. The whole class gets to participate. It's one of their favorite days. They always look forward to it. The specialists always have different engaging activities to challenge their fine and gross motor skills, social and communication skills, and then we continue to build on those skills back in the classroom.
They really know their students really, really well. The relationships that they form with the children and with the families is just so impressive.
I've taught at inclusion preschools before, and from day one to the end of the school year, they grow emotionally, they grow academically, they just grow as respectful individuals, and they will stand up for each other.
It's amazing to see my kids want to help others versus just give me. And at 3 and 5 years old, I am very blessed with the opportunity that Lifehouse has provided my family.
We hope to be a positive model for Marin and hope to encourage other preschools to see the benefits of inclusion too.
All right, I'm not crying, you're crying. All right, so Joseph, there was highlighted a little bit there, the boy with blonde hair. What did you notice there at that inclusion preschool setting in terms of presumed competence, autonomy, and relatedness? Go ahead and type in the chat. Relationship building, right? Like that's the number 3. So not just relationships among the children, but with their families, super important. Yeah. Good stuff there. All right, I'm going to keep moving here because we're going to be running out of time. There's a lot to talk about. All right, so here we are. Advice for parents. So this strengths-based approach is something that we sometimes have to support parents in because sometimes parents are coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences of their own, which may not necessarily be a strengths-based approach. And so providers working with families need to support parents by encouraging them to use a strengths-based approach as well. So, you know, being patient, we heard that a lot from the teachers, right? Being patient. Sometimes it takes children who are neurodiverse, neurodivergent, a little bit extra time, sometimes a lot bit extra time. Sometimes it takes a whole school year, right? For us to be detectives, to hone in on what works for that particular child, to get their engagement and motivation. For us to understand that all 3 of those gas tanks need to be filled and make sure that we're filling them appropriately to get that car moving. Always stay positive, positive reinforcement, rewarding good behavior, and lifting that child up, being generous with compliments for good behavior, and not just good job, right? I really liked how you shared how you shared the toy. I really liked how you waited your turn. And we can do this as childhood educators too, staying positive, generous compliments for the types of behavior we want to see. Interacting with children through physical activity. Again, I use that example of the child was not ready to come to the table to do a puzzle or do structured speech therapy activities, but maybe they were more engaged and more motivated when we threw a ball back and forth and worked on language. So you saw also the OT session using physical activity to engage with children and sometimes motivate can help them relax and feel calmer. Being affectionate and respectful. Again, asking for a hug is important. Even parents need to do that. Sometimes as parents, if we have a child that tends to want to shy away from physical affection and that hurts parents, they want physical affection, and sometimes that's the only way we can connect with a child, to just respect that, and even if it's just light contact can cause distress, and just understanding that we have to sometimes respect children's personal space and never force physical affection on a child that's not ready to receive it. Showing love and interest, and you can do that in other ways. It doesn't have to be physical. Showing caring and support, showing interest, wanting to play and follow the child's lead by seeing what they're interested in and playing that game, right? Moving away from what we want them to do, putting aside our agenda and really following what that child is interested and motivated in. Learning from your child, the same sort of thing, like learning what their gifts are, learning what their strengths are, and supporting, recognizing, and respecting those strengths. Believing, again, this is that presumed competence. A child with autism is first and foremost a child, and they're a growing person with unknown possibilities. Believe in what that child can do. Don't define the child by a diagnosis. And then lastly, we want to remind parents to take care of themselves, right? Parenting a neurodivergent child is not always easy. It can be very hard, very challenging, especially if that child has aggressive or harmful or self-injurious behaviors, that they're, you know, hurting themselves or hurting others around them or running away in public places. These kinds of behaviors can take a toll on parents. Some of you parents who also are parenting kids who are on the spectrum who have other challenges, it's okay, take a break, ask for help, join support groups. Family Resource Navigators is a great resource. Help Me Grow is a great resources that we can share with families to reach out and get help, get support. Asking family and friends to care for the child, even if it's just for a small period of time, just so that they can recharge. And then advice for professionals. This is going to be a lot of them, so get ready. You guys are going to have access to this presentation at the end, so you can always refer back to it. Make your own posters that you can post in your office or on your phone to remind yourself. Always ask before giving assistance. Is it okay if I help you? Is it okay if I touch you? Let the person tell you what you may do to be helpful. How you can ask them, how can I support you? And let them tell you if they can tell you. This is more for older kids and adults as well. Always speak to the person directly, not the support person or companion or the parent. Speak to the child directly. Again, always assume that don't assume that just because they can't speak that they can't understand you. People usually understand more than they're able to express. Here's another one. Never pretend that you understand what someone said if you don't understand it. If you don't understand it, ask for them to repeat it. This is going to help them be more clearly understood when they get older and they get out in the workplace, or, you know, go to college or wherever it is that they're going to go when they're older in life. You have to let them know that you didn't understand and then repeat what you understand. I heard you say, right? Restate it. Don't do, and this is advice that we can use in any area, right? As professionals, don't try to finish a person's sentence or cut them off. Allow them that time and space to communicate, even if it takes longer. We have to be patient. Here's a really important one. You may not be able to see someone's disability, or their neurodivergence is not always visible. There are many disabilities that are hidden within a person. So that's sometimes autism is called an invisible disability. And so again, we don't want to assume, we want to presume competence. And this idea of inclusion and including children together from a very young age really creates this awareness and acceptance that, again, with these high number of children on the spectrum, as we grow up and we become peers, working, you know, having coworkers, having team members who are neurodivergent working alongside of us, if you've been in an inclusive environment since you were a young child, then this is normal for you, right? This is not something new. This is not something you have to learn as an adult. It's something that you kind of always been around children or people who have autism, so that working with a coworker or having someone on your team at work is not going to be any different when you become an adult. That's the hope, that we change as a society. Here is a quote from Dr. Stephen Short. If you've met one person with autism, you've only met that one person with autism. Again, autism is a huge spectrum, and there's a incredible, limitless variety of people's strengths, presentations, challenges. It's a huge spectrum. And so just because you've met one person with autism, that doesn't mean what applied for that person applies for everyone else. Everyone is different. And so you want to be a detective and ask, how can I help? How can I support? Is there anything I can do to support you? How do you prefer to get information? How do you prefer to learn? How, you know, these kinds of questions that help you bridge the gaps and build understanding, so that we can have more motivation and engagement and support people to have better quality of life. In the end is what we're trying to go for here. All right, running out of time. We got 3 minutes left. Couple more things here, more tips. Let's see, I'm just going to cruise through here, see what's really different. Being patient, we've kind of gone all over this. Focus on what a person can do. Everybody wants a chance to live a typical life. include people with disabilities in meetings about their own goals. So those of us who are working with IFSPs or IEPs, beginning at a young age, include students in their own IEP meetings and have them talk to their teachers about their struggles and their strengths and how best to accommodate them in the classroom. Ask these children, include their opinions. It's really important, as much as possible. Best practices here: educate yourself as a provider. We know that learning is a lifelong process. Read blogs and articles that are written by neurodivergent people. You know, this is kind of the for us, by us movement, that we have to listen and respect the voices of neurodivergent folks. What do they have to say? What is their perspective? What has their experience been? And really hear it and listen it and incorporate that into our practices. Check your bias. Sometimes we have to get uncomfortable with it. And there's sometimes we have biases that we're not even aware of. The Washington Post put out an ableist thinking disability bias quiz. So the link is there. That's available on the internet. It's a quick quiz that you can go through that sort of looks at, you can look at your own and check your bias. It might yield things that you didn't know about yourself. And then some of you may have heard about the Crip Camp film that was produced by the Obamas. It's on Netflix. It's a wonderful film. It's going to make you cry. It's a really important and powerful documentary about the disability rights movement in the 70s and how it started. To really understand what all this is rooted in, and it's just a great film. I encourage you to watch it if you haven't seen it already. Crip Camp is the name of the documentary, and it's on Netflix. Yeah, and then just beginning steps towards awareness and practice of advocacy over ableism. And this is a lot of things we've already discussed. Asking. Ask the person, what do you prefer? How do you say no? What do you like? What don't you like? These are all ways of showing respect and advocacy over ableism. So we move away from pushing our beliefs and our agendas on folks and really asking and respecting what folks want for themselves. Some really important parts here. It says, acknowledging as a practitioner, this is number 8, that you may and you will get it wrong, and do your best to address and remediate this as soon as the error or the oversight is known. And then there's this lovely quote here from Maya Angelou that many of us are familiar with. Do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, you do better. And this is something for us to all take home with us. When we know better, we do better. So hopefully you're taking away from this training that you should know better. And when we know better, ultimately, we do better to move towards advocacy over ableism. So may you strive to continually access knowledge to increase your care and practices with others. Again, just thinking about these growing numbers of neurodivergent folks in our community, which maybe we still don't know what causes it, right? It's something genetic, something environmental, all of that put together. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The fact is that there are growing prevalence of neurodivergence in our communities. And it's on us as a society to bend, to accept, and to accommodate and celebrate everyone across the board in schools, playgrounds, and workplaces. Despite the advancements, there's still a lot of work to do in order to fully realize the potential of neurodivergence. Educating everyone, employers, the general public about the strengths and abilities of neurodiverse individuals, providing resources, again, these goals of neurodiversity to help neurodiverse individuals succeed in the workplace and in their communities, okay? Hopefully that was motivating for you and you took home some useful tools. Again, this recording is going to be shared with you so you can reflect back on it and share it with folks in your community and your workspaces, and have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Claire, for such a great presentation and sharing with us some steps and how do we keep moving things forward. And just a friendly reminder, we do have an evaluation that will be sent out, and all the links to the materials are in the chat. So feel free to check that out. I think we may have a question, but if not, you're welcome to email us if you have anything that you'd like to share with us. You're welcome to do so. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you in our next upcoming training session. Have a nice day.